Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. The body of a Canadian killed by Hamas in the October 2023 attack in Israel is recovered. Plus, with a trade war raging on, a new poll suggests Canadians are divided whether the U.S. is an ally or an enemy. And Alberta makes it easier for oil rigs to get to the field and spend less time on highways.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. Israel has recovered the body of a Canadian citizen taken hostage in the 2023 Hamas attack that ignited the war in the Gaza Strip. Officials say the remains of Judy Weinstein, as well as her husband Gad Haggai, have been recovered and returned to Israel in a special military operation.
אמש במבצע מיוחד של השב"כ וצה"ל החזרנו למנוחת עולמים בישראל שני חטופים יקרים שנרצחו ונחטפו ב7 באוקטובר בקיבוץ ניר עוז, את גדי חגי ואת רעייתו ג'ודי ויינשטיין חגי, זיכרונם לברכה. ויחד עם כל אזרחי ישראל אנחנו מרכינים ראש לזכרם ומוסרים תנחומים למשפחתם. מתחילת המלחמה אנחנו החזרנו הביתה 199 חטופים, מתוכם 48 שהוחזרו במבצעים מיוחדים, ואנחנו נחושים להחזיר את כולם, בלי יוצא מן הכלל, החיים והחללים כאחד.
Weinstein and Haggai, both in their 70s, were killed by Hamas militants October 7th while they were out for a morning walk near their home in the kibbutz near Oz. Israel's ambassador to Canada, Ido Moed, says this is, quote, a painful moment that brings closure to a family. Canadian steel companies and union workers want Ottawa to punch back at U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff hike. They are meeting with MPs today in an effort to convince the federal government to quickly implement matching tariffs in retaliation. That's after Trump doubled his duties on steel and aluminum products to 50%. Prime Minister Mark Carney has called the move unlawful and unjustified. But Carney says his Liberal government will need to take some time to craft a response as they examine different scenarios. A new Leger poll shows Canadians are divided on whether they view the United States as an enemy or an ally in the face of an ongoing trade war. Almost a third of respondents say that they view the U.S. as a neutral country, while 27% said they consider it an ally and 26% see it as an enemy country. Andrew Enns, Leger's executive vice president for Central Canada, says a decline in the number of people saying the U.S. is an enemy likely reflects a decrease in rhetoric from the White House.
The patterns haven't changed too much since when we first asked that question back in sort of the heat of things in I think it was February. We may have asked that question for the first time. There has been I would say a decline, a noticeable decline in the number of people that are saying they perceive the United States as an enemy. That was over 30% at one point. I think 32% might have been the highest at one point. So it's down about 5 points, which I feel reflects the kind of the sentiment that is around the tariffs situation. It's still obviously there, and clearly now we're dealing with higher steel tariffs, but the commentary coming from the White House and the Trump administration seems to have dissipated a bit, and that's probably helping just tone things down. We've got and I think I would also suggest that we do have a new prime minister with a mandate that probably helps just take the edge off things. And for Canadians, he says as I think I read this morning, I mean, we're in active conversations and active discussions. So, for Canadians, I think that just keeps things more at a moderate level. And I think that reflects in people maybe feeling a little less threatened by the U.S., and that where you see a dip in that number.
The poll also shows older Canadians, those at least 55 years of age, were more likely to consider the U.S. an enemy than younger Canadians. Regionally, Albertans were most likely to consider the U.S. an ally, while Ontarians and British Columbians were most likely to see it as an enemy. Some good news for oil rig operators in Alberta. The government is cutting red tape to help service rig operators spend less time waiting at inspection sites and more time in the field. A memorandum of agreement between the province and the Canadian Association of Energy Contractors will allow rig operators to participate in something called the DriveWise program.
Now, the DriveWise program utilizes technology that helps eligible trucks bypass weigh stations, saving drivers time and reducing delays on our highways. To qualify to be part of the DriveWise program, companies have to meet safety benchmarks, and only companies that meet these safety standards will be exempt from routine stops at vehicle inspection stations. Now, this agreement also continues our work to align Alberta's rules with those in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, providing consistency across Western Canada for industry operators. Now, by modernizing this agreement, we're delivering on our promise to cut red tape and support Alberta businesses.
The 91-member company in the Canadian Association of Energy Contractors operate more than 300 drilling rigs in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and Atlantic Canada. Lethbridge police have made a massive drug bust, seizing nearly $500,000 in drugs, making it one of the largest seizures of cocaine and MDMA in recent history in the city. On May 28th, police executed a search warrant at a home in the 600 block of North 10th Street. One man was arrested and police seized a variety of paraphernalia, cash, and drugs, including cocaine, marijuana, ketamine, psilocybin, and ecstasy.
And we seized 3.6 kilograms of cocaine, over 1,600 MDMA or ecstasy tablets, 46 grams of ketamine, 425 grams of psilocybin, over 1,600 black stock cigarettes, 6 kilograms of cannabis, 500 cartridges of cannabis extract, and over $16,000 cash and proceeds of crime. And so this culminated for the tremendous efforts of our crime suppression team and our property crimes team, who have been working really hard to address some of the addictions issues that have taken place in our community. The significance of locating any substance that isn't necessarily regulated or isn't sold through a specific store, just like the cannabis here, is we truly don't know what's in it, and neither does the user. And so when you go to buy something from a store, it's regulated by the government. We know what's going to be in it, and the user knows what's going to be in it. This stuff, we can't speak to that. And it's not entirely uncommon for us to find substances when tested in drugs that were unexpected.
37-year-old Bradshaw Jerome Baylog and 26-year-old Aspen Michaela Woodman, both from Lethbridge, are charged with 4 counts of possession of a controlled substance for the purpose of trafficking and 1 count of possession of the proceeds of a crime of over $5,000. A drug seizure in Medicine Hat has netted police a significant stash of cocaine and left 2 people facing charges. Police discovered just over 1 kilogram of cocaine in a vehicle during a planned traffic stop near Redcliffe. That seizure led to a search of 2 Medicine Hat homes on Tuesday, June 3rd, where police seized more drugs and cash. The drugs seized have an estimated street value of $125,000. 24-year-old Connor Smith Boutelier and 46-year-old Melissa Gertner, both of Medicine Hat, are charged with possession of drugs for the purpose of trafficking and possession of proceeds of crime. Gertner is also charged with possession of a prohibited weapon. The Alberta government is investing an additional $1.5 million to support access to counseling and therapy services at sexual assault centers. The Chinook Sexual Assault Center in Lethbridge will be one of the beneficiaries. CEO Christine Cassie says the funding will allow them to hire a second therapist.
The funding that's being allocated is specific to counseling or therapy programs that we operate. So we have a very small one here. So this actually allows us to expand to hire a second therapist, which is great. Our therapists are specially trained when it comes to sexual violence and the impacts that this happens. So it's beyond being trauma informed. It's actually a specialized service. So we're forward to both building capacity for our agency, but also in how we serve our community. So it's really hard when people have been keeping this information for a long time. So we actually get to double our workforce, which is great for therapy, which means that there's more access. Those people that have been been waiting to actually see a therapist here won't have to wait so much longer. What we're seeing is really growing intervention. We know that those that come forward tend not to go forward to the police. They tend to come forward to sexual assault centers, to friends, to family members when they've had these experiences. That only 6% actually end up going to policing agencies to actually make that type of report.
The Alberta government says this latest investment builds on the $1.5 million that was distributed to sexual assault centers in March and is in addition to the $13.8 million invested annually to 15 sexual assault centers across the province. Our Lady of the Assumption School in Lethbridge received its certification to become an International Baccalaureate Primary Years Program school. This means that students will learn their typical Alberta school curriculum tied with themes of inquiry, global and social issues. On Thursday, all grade 6 students held an exhibition of their research from the last few months on subjects they were most passionate about. Students chose subjects from UN Sustainable Development Goals and Catholic school justice principles to discover ways that they can make a difference.
At an IB school, the biggest push is that we are learning about how to learn as much as we are learning about what we learn. So the goal is for students to become active global citizens who are ready to take their place in the world, who are ready to ask questions, who are ready to inquire and just make a difference. It's a lot about learning to learn. So what we're teaching is still the Alberta curriculum, but it's as important how we're learning it and the skills we're building and who we're becoming as we learn as it is what we are learning.
For our project, we did climate change affecting marine life. So we mainly focused on coral bleaching and how climate change can cause it, and about the algae that disappears once climate change starts affecting that area. There was also some other cool stuff like light pollution, and I never thought it existed, and some people did energy sources, and I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, it's been a pretty good experience. So I like how creative you can be inside of it. I also like how you can really choose almost any topic for yours. So I made an air pollution exhibit. So for the past month, we've been researching about traffic-related pollution, and for 2 months, we were researching about solar energy and how it impacts air pollution.
Our Lady of the Assumption School previously ran as an International Baccalaureate Primary Years Program candidate school, and with the new certification, the school becomes the only elementary in Southern Alberta to be IB certified, and those kids certainly look very smart. They sounded smart anyways. The City of Lethbridge has awarded funding to 26 community projects through 2 separate grant programs. The city is investing $1.2 million towards their Community Capital Project grant and Make Your Mark grant to go towards not-for-profit organizations to create more inclusive and accessible spaces. One recipient, the Lethbridge Sport Council, has received approximately $25,000 to help reduce barriers for youth that don't have access to new sporting gear. Their executive director says this funding will help them acquire the necessities for handling the used equipment that they received from the Calgary Flames Sport Bank.
One of the major pieces of equipment that we would need is a sanitizing machine, so that when used equipment comes in, we can sanitize it, clean it, and then redistribute it to the children and youth in Lethbridge. So having the support to purchase this is fantastic. It helps with that one more step in the logistics of getting a distribution center started here. With our ongoing relationship with the city, this support is just another check off that we're moving forwards, and I'm certain in the next year we will have a center opened.
We've got a really diverse amount of projects that are receiving this funding. It was very competitive intake for both programs, Make Your Mark in particular. We had 57 applications. We were able to award 20 projects, some amazing projects in our community. And so, yeah, we're really excited with this announcement.
The largest grant from the city will go towards a multi-sport dome at the University of Lethbridge, which will receive $200,000 from the Community Capital Project grant. This is the time of year when people start thinking about the Annie effect, the annual fundraiser in memory of Annie Olson. The 3.5-month-old died in her sleep in October of 2022. For the third year in a row, the community is being called upon to help those most in need by collecting items suitable for 3-year-olds, which is the age that Annie would now be. Michelle Gallucci, Director of Development and Communications for Lethbridge Family Services, says these donations will support newly arrived LFS families and the children at Angel Tree.
Today, Annie's spirit lives on through acts of kindness and generosity. LFS is deeply honored to accept gifts collected in her memory on behalf of the Olson family. It reflects the beauty of turning grief into generosity and loss into love. We are sincerely grateful for every donation made in Annie's honor.
I'm grateful that we can help lots of families in our communities that need the help with diapers, formulas, wipes, and toys suitable for a 3-year-old boy or girl. The event has grown. The first year we had roughly about 100 people. The second year close to 200, 250, and double the size in amount of diapers, wipes, and formula. So it is growing. Also with the gifts, blankets, books, toys, also about the double amounts. The goal is to continue it for as long as we can.
The collection event will be held on June 20th from 6 p.m. till 7:30 p.m. at Cooley Creek Park. A young local craftsman was awarded the gold at the Skills Canada National Competition in Regina last week for cabinet making. Tate McGarry, an 18-year-old employee at Fuso Woodworks in Lethbridge and former Chinook High School student, has qualified for World Skills next year in China. McGarry says his time at Fuso, coupled with constant practice, pushed him to this point, and he's excited those efforts are being recognized.
Well, the one guy was telling me he really liked the consistency for what I did. So everything was consistently pretty good. I've been doing it for, not sure how long, but been doing it when I was younger, like that, and I've now work at Fuso for the last 2 years. Most of the stuff I know now I've learned through Fuso, so really appreciate that. Definitely nervous. That's going to be a huge competition. I think I start practicing in like the next few months. So I'll start going up to SAIT and start building like practice stuff and to try to prepare. So that's pretty cool. Now you get to represent Canada for cabinet making, so that's really cool.
McGarry says he will head to SAIT, or the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, for post-secondary next year to further pursue a career in cabinet making. The City of Lethbridge is reminding motorists to use caution as crews are working along Whoop Up Drive this week. Starting on Thursday, staff will be mowing grass in the Meridian along Whoop Up Drive. The working area will span from 4th Street South to just east of the bridge deck. To give crews more room to operate, the inner lanes of this area will be closed eastbound and westbound. This work should be completed by the end of the day, weather permitting. Then on Saturday, June 7th, there will be overhead sign inspections along Whoop Up Drive. This includes the overhead signage at the University Drive West overpass and the ramp to Scenic Drive South. Intermittent lane closures will be in place for both eastbound and westbound traffic. Well, smoke from wildfires blazing in northern parts of Saskatchewan and Manitoba is causing poor air quality. Environment Canada's air quality index is showing toxic air is also swirling across the Northwest Territories, which is dealing with its own wildfires. The Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency says air quality can cause health problems and poor visibility. The agency is advising people to stay indoors and try to reduce their exposure to smoke. Also, the residents of Swan Hills in northern Alberta are now allowed to go home. A week and a half after a wildfire in the area forced the community's 1,300 residents to flee to safety. Well, no signs of smoke here in southern Alberta. It was a lovely sunny day as we made our way to 24 degrees, and we've got lots more sunshine headed our way. Your complete forecast is coming right up. But we're going to see some nice toasty weather as we look into the next 7 days here tonight. Winds from the southwest at 20 kilometers per hour. Into tomorrow, those winds could gust up to 30 Lots of sunshine, though, and nice warm conditions. So 26 for the high for our Friday. On Saturday, a little bit cooler, but still lovely. 23 degrees, mix of sun and cloud. 25 on Sunday with clear skies. Into Monday, now we're talking. We're getting hot here. 31 degrees expected Monday, 30 on Tuesday, and then back to 25 degrees on Wednesday. I'd say that's a pretty decent looking week. So average high for this time of year, 21 degrees. Average low, 8 degrees. 31 was our record high on this day that happened back in 1961. And 10 years earlier in 1951, we saw the record low on this day, which was only 0, if you can believe that for this time of year. Sun rose this morning at 5:26. This evening, we're going to see the sun set at 9:34 p.m. That means 16 hours and 8 minutes of daylight is what we saw today. On the west coast tomorrow, 22 degrees in Victoria, more like 17 by the water, some light winds, more like 30 kilometer per hour winds in the Juan de Fuca Strait. It's always windier in that Juan de Fuca Strait. 20 degrees expected in Vancouver, but further inland you go. It's getting hotter, 25 there. Edmonton, seeing a mix of sun and cloud in the morning, but afternoon showers of 30%. Both Edmonton and Calgary are going to actually see that. 22 for the high in Edmonton, 26 in Calgary. So Calgary coming in a little bit warmer with those afternoon showers. Now, across the rest of the prairies, Saskatoon, mix of sun and cloud, but we've also got some hazy conditions, both in Saskatoon and Regina due to those wildfires. 26 in Saskatoon, 25 in Regina, 26 in Winnipeg. Winnipeg also could see some clear skies, but there is an air quality warning in effect for this evening as wildfire smoke, widespread smoke could cause poor air quality and also reduce visibility. By tomorrow, though, sunshine and hazy conditions. Looking into the central part of the country now, we are seeing local smoke also in Toronto and Ottawa, but mainly cloudy skies there in Toronto. 23 for the high, 26 expected in Ottawa tomorrow with sunshine, but still seeing local smoke, which could create some haze as well. Montreal seeing a slight chance of showers in the afternoon, 25 for the high. Now, Fredericton is seeing a severe thunderstorm watch this evening, also expecting 10 millimeters of rain. Tomorrow, the rain's going to lighten up to just a 30% chance. 27 for the high there. Now, Halifax seeing a risk of a thunderstorm. Could see 60% chance of showers, high 22, high of 19 in Charlottetown. Charlottetown seeing some fog retreating into the coast in the morning, and then those showers there. And same thing in St. John, seeing fog retreating into the coast in the morning. Could see a 60% chance of drizzle or showers, high of 24 there. So there you have it. That is your forecast. The Canadian Union of Postal Workers says it's filed an unfair labor practice complaint against Canada Post. The union accuses the Crown Corporation of bargaining directly with members, interfering with the union's exclusive bargaining rights while trying to discredit its reputation. It refers to Canada Post pointing members to a website that gives contract negotiation updates while updating offers based on online feedback. Canada Post did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Nintendo launched its Switch 2 video game consoles today. Eager customers lined up outside electronics stores in Tokyo hours in advance to pick up the new console. The Switch 2 is an upgrade to its 8-year-old predecessor and has new social features aimed at drawing players into online gaming. The new consoles were sold through a competitive lottery system that Nintendo said got about 2.2 million applications in Japan alone, with some retailers offering their own lottery to pre-order these devices. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 13 points on the day to finish at 26,342. The Dow was down 35 to 42,319. The S&P 500 was down 31 points to 5,939, and the Nasdaq was down 162 to 19,298. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 42 cents to 63.27 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 6 cents to 3.65 US. Gold was down 20.25 to 33.52.59 US an ounce, and silver was up $1.15 to $36.65 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.84 per bushel, barley is at $6.90, canola is at $15.85, and corn is at $7.95 per bushel. Live cattle June contract was up $4.50 to $222.90. Feeder cattle August contract was up $5.27 to $309.15, and lean hogs June contract was up 87 cents to $100.85. And the Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 73.10 US.
Recapping one of our top stories today, lots of tariff talk today in Ottawa after U.S. President Donald Trump doubled his steel and aluminum tariffs yesterday to 50%. Industry Minister Melanie Joly emerged from her meetings with steel industry CEOs without any concrete retaliatory action to announce. She says Canada won't negotiate in public around U.S. tariffs. But Ontario Premier Doug Ford and the steel industry are calling for swift retaliation against the heightened import duties. Mark Carney seems to be making an effort to win over Canadians. His rhetoric of building up Canada has an energy superpower, has premiers crossing their fingers, and now a poll shows Carney's popularity rising in an Alberta city. Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley will give us his latest on Canada's political affairs coming up next. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or YouTube channel anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. We all know that the price of groceries has skyrocketed, and now Alberta beef, even though it's produced here in the West, is also becoming unaffordable. Also, the Prime Minister met with all the premiers recently, but will there be a pipeline built? And what are the polls saying about our new PM, Mark Carney? Brian Lilley is a political commentator and Toronto Sun columnist. He joins me now to chat about it all. Brian, welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Okay, so Brian, as the Prime Minister met with the premiers in Saskatoon, there was a lot of smoke wafting through the city due to the wildfires, of course. But Mark Carney was really trying to clear the air with the premiers. So did it work?
It seemed to. Look, I expected him to deliver something on Monday. I thought that with all the premiers putting in their demands and their lists and the projects that they wanted, that he would come out and announce something going forward. He didn't. They did come together and say, here are the 5 criteria that any projects will need to meet. Some of that, such as green growth potential, items like that, might make folks in the oil patch wonder and worry. But even Premier Danielle Smith, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe were saying generally good things out of the meeting. Premier Smith did say if we get to the point where the government has to build a pipeline, we will have failed at the assignment. I agree with that. But everyone seems to be willing to give Mark Carney benefit of the doubt for now. I guess we're still in that early phase where you say, okay, you keep saying the right words. My point is there needs to be a little less conversation, a little more action, to quote Elvis.
There you go. So, Brian, you are reporting that a deal is imminent between Ottawa and Washington. So what kind of trade deal are we talking about here?
It would not be the giant, 1,000-page trade deal that is the CUSMA or USMACA, whichever name you want to give to it. It goes by both. It wouldn't be the massive NAFTA deal. When the Brits got their deal with the Trump administration, it was about 12 pages, and it was a very high-level proposal that talked about things in broad strokes. And that's what I'm told we are looking at. And so there is a draft plan there, a draft deal, if you will. Will political leaders on both sides of the border be able to get it to the finish line? That part we don't know. The goal is to have something announced by the time the G7 meetings start on Sunday, June 15th in Kananaskis, Alberta. you guys are getting a lot of attention these days. And so they want the deal announced by then. You know, is it at the beginning of the G7 meetings? Do they do it before? Does Donald Trump blurt out on Air Force One on the way up that he signed a deal and it's the best deal ever? We don't know, but very high level, broad strokes, things like supply management for dairy, that would be put aside. The digital services tax, which all the Americans hate. The Biden administration was taking us to, trade tribunals over that. That would be set aside for now. Those things and the full renegotiation of the massive Kuzma trade deal would be put off into the future, and general agreement on broad principles would be part of this deal.
Carney also talking about these big nation building projects, and we didn't get a commitment from him on Monday out of that meeting for a new pipeline or any other major projects like that. But you think some of these other big nation building projects could be part of that trade deal with Trump? So why do you think that?
Well, I mean, there are things that he could do that would really make the Americans happy that would also be a nation building project, something like the uh, Grays Bay Port project in Nunavut, which could make Alberta very happy if it was paired with a pipeline going north to the Arctic coast. The Americans have wanted Grays Bay to be up there. It's primarily the proposal is primarily for commercial uses, trade uses for this deep water port in the Arctic. But you could end up with additional national security through that. So, you tie in a pipeline going north, a port, space for the Navy to operate up there. The Americans become very happy. That's what Donald Trump wants. He wants us looking after our Arctic security, where, as Steve Bannon said to me a couple of months ago, it is our soft underbelly. So, all these things could end up being part of it, or, some sort of energy security corridor. That could all be part of trying to, beef this up, make it look good, make it look like Trump can also say, hey, they're building this port, and that's a military investment, and we're going to also join the Golden Dome, and so we're not subsidizing Canada anymore. I can lift the tariffs.
Okay, Brian, tell us about the ongoing debate about the pipelines going through Quebec. It seems that, there's been some thawing of the opinion in that province. The debate about it is not quite complete yet.
Yeah, Quebec Premier Francois Legault has been more open to a pipeline going through his province, saying, well, maybe given what's going on with Donald Trump, now's the time. But in Ottawa, the Bloc Québécois has been defiant, and they are saying you can't use Donald Trump to put a pipeline through our jurisdiction. Well, it's not the choice of the Bloc Québécois. There has been improvements in public opinion polling on the idea, but at the provincial level, all the opposition parties are fighting against it. At the federal level, the Bloc is dead set against it. And so there is a huge debate in Quebec. One of my colleagues at National Post went through and looked at the speeches of a newly elected Bloc MP and he's a former Greenpeace activist, kind of like Stephen Guilbeault, but working for the separatists instead of the Liberals. He's mentioned since Parliament returned, and remember that was just last week, he's mentioned pipelines in Quebec 20 times.
Wow.
So they are pushing hard against it. Not saying it won't happen, but I imagine it would be a big election issue in Quebec, and I think they're expected to go to the polls next year.
Yeah. Brian, in a few weeks' time, politicians from across the country will descend on Calgary, not just to head to the mountains for the G7 summit, but also to put on a cowboy hat that they might be wearing once a year and taking some stampede action, which is coming up in July. So Justin Trudeau often got a rough ride. He would always show up and flip a pancake or two. But you have looked at the polls, and they're saying right now that Mark Carney is about as popular as Pierre Poilievre. So is that for real?
It is. It's Janet Brown, the Alberta-based pollster, who did this polling, and they said on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you, 0 to 10, 0 being the lowest, 10 being the highest, how impressed are you? And it was about 37% were on the impressed side, about 35% on the unimpressed side. The numbers very similar. They were within single digits of each other between Carney and Poilievre. So almost 4 in 10 Albertans are saying, yeah, I'm sufficiently impressed with how the guy's doing so far. Justin Trudeau wouldn't have gotten those numbers. And, you saw the rough ride he would get at Stampede. So I doubt that if Mark Carney goes, and he most likely will, that I doubt he's going to get a rough ride from a lot of people who are giving him, as I said earlier, benefit of the doubt at this point. There's still 35% that aren't impressed, but that 37% number is a lot higher than I expected. By the way, I'll let the cat out of the bag now. You might see me in a cowboy hat at Stampede for the first time ever in all my years of visiting one of the most beautiful provinces in the country. I have never been to Stampede.
You've never been to Stampede. Well, shame on you. And I'm so happy that you're finally making it a priority to come this year because it is just amazing. So, yeah, we'll be watching for you in a cowboy hat. You going to flip a pancake? We'll see. Maybe have one.
I might.
All right. Okay, so here in Alberta, speaking of Alberta, we are known for liking our beef. In fact, Alberta beef is its own brand. And of course, there are so many ranches in the province. And New Statistics Canada data, though, is showing that beef is getting so unaffordable for so many Canadians. Why is that, Brian?
Well, I'm going to give all the credit to Sylvain Charlevoix, the food professor, who brought this to my attention. He has a column in the Toronto Sun about it. And strip loin steaks are up 34%, according to StatsCan data. Since January, strip loin's up 34%. Ground beef even is up, I think, in the more than 10% category. And so people have been eating less beef over the last several years. There has been a decline in beef, but there's also been a decline in the size of the herd. And apparently, we have the fewest cattle in our beef herds than we've had since 1989. It's 35 years ago, 36 years ago, I guess, actually. And guess what? The population's grown an awful lot by then, but we've got fewer cows. So why is that happening? Changes in the market, some ranchers just deciding, you know what, this is too risky, or some, he said, are bowing out because prices are high right now. It's a good time to sell, good time to get out of this. And some have turned to other methods of farming, including some going to crops. So that's happening. There's an increase in the U.S., but not as marked. He also points to the fact, how big the country is, geography, transportation, all of that. So he said there's a lot of problems, but he did call for an investigation by the Competition Bureau to see if there is collusion as well. When I was covering the bread price fixing scandal, there was an executive caught in an email talking about trying to fix the price of meat. Now, in that case, it was specifically pork, but if it happened in bread, and we've seen enough evidence that we should look into pork, maybe we should be looking into whether there is anti-competitive behavior driving up the price. I am a big fan of beef, and the supermarkets around me, they all market that it is Alberta beef. That's a selling feature. But I've been noticing that the good cuts are harder to find. They're not on the shelves because they're priced so high, and people won't be buying them.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, Brian, this Sunday coming up is Tax Freedom Day for most Canadians. It's not a holiday, but tell us what this day represents. I'm thinking bigger paychecks, slightly. Right?
It's a very depressing day, and the Fraser Institute has been calculating this every year, going back a couple of decades now. And Tax Freedom Day is the day that you have worked.
Yes.
To pay your total tax bill. So that would be your federal income tax, your provincial income tax, your sales tax, your property taxes on your home. All the taxes that you're going to pay in a year, they do it up, and on average, Canadians will have paid their tax bill by June 8th, and they get to work the rest of the year for themselves. Exactly. How sad is that we're into the 6th month. It's not 6 full months, but it is into the 6th month before we've paid our full tax bill.
Maybe that's seeing the glass half empty.
It was changing. It was going in the right direction for a little while. Now it's, since Justin Trudeau came in, it's gone in the other direction where it comes later in the year.
But the good news is that, like you said, we're now working for ourselves. So you actually get a little bit of a raise, it would seem. without paying all those all those taxes. I had one question regarding Mark Carney's polling and how Albertans see him. Do you think that he, being an Albertan and from Edmonton, makes a difference? Does he sort of have more of an ear for Albertans, do you think? What's your opinion about that?
I'm not sure. I think it's just because he seems like an adult and is acting like an adult and seems to want to get things done. This is a bit of the honeymoon phase, and it could quickly disappear if he, says the wrong thing in Alberta, or if he, gives into the desires of some of his cabinet ministers to shut down the oil and gas industry, or brings back the fertilizer nitrogen mandates. If those sorts of things happen, I think this popularity could go away quickly. If he shows that he's getting things done and behaving like an adult, maybe people will like him even more. I was commenting a little while ago. We're excited about a guy being punctual and dressing properly in the office. We shouldn't be. That just shows you how low Justin Trudeau lowered the bar. And so we're having someone act like an adult. I think it's refreshing. And whether people voted for Carney and the Liberals or not, they're going, wow, thank God it's not the guy in his running shoes at the throne speech again.
Yeah. Well, I know Premier Danielle Smith has invited him to one of the Oilers games coming up at Rogers Place.
He is a big Oilers fan,
Yes.
and he was before the bandwagon. I encourage everyone to get on the bandwagon right now, though.
Yeah, for sure. Show up in your blue and orange, definitely. We'll see if he's there. Brian Lilly of the Toronto Sun, thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you for having me.
A new report from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms has come up with some interesting findings on the physical, social, and economic impacts of the COVID lockdowns. So joining us from Calgary to chat about this study, which is entitled 5 Years On, Tracing the Costs of Lockdowns. Well, here's Benjamin Clausen. He's the Research and Education Coordinator with the Justice Center. Welcome, Benjamin. Great to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Okay, so Benjamin, COVID restrictions, they started back in 2020, in theory, to protect the health of Canadians. But did the lockdowns help or hinder people's overall health? What did the report have to say on the mental and emotional health of Canadians about this?
Yeah, that's exactly what we were trying to find out in this report. And we looked at a whole series of data, cataloging data over year over year over the last 5 years. And we found that COVID in reality caused more harms than actually contributed to saving lives.
Yeah. Of course, elderly people are more vulnerable to things like the flu or COVID. So many did feel that the restrictions and lockdowns were justified, of course. But with the loneliness and the lack of emotional support available, do we know to what degree this actually affected the mental health and also physical health of seniors?
We didn't look at the mental health and physical health at seniors in detail that much. We looked more at Canadians overall and also younger people. But what we do know is that even for seniors, there were lots of deaths that were not caused by COVID. And this was way more pronounced for younger Canadians. So, for example, Canadians under the age of 45 had very low COVID death rates, but had quite high non-COVID death rates.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, when we're talking about loneliness, lack of emotional support, and all of that, it can apply to any age, obviously. We saw what happened with the kids, with the school lockdowns and whatnot, right? The depression seemed to be on the rise.
Yeah, that's right. Mental health was something that was overlooked largely by politicians and policymakers. What we found in this report is that Canadians' overall mental health dropped dramatically, and that was for all ages. But most pronounced, again, was for young Canadians, especially the Canadians under the age of 45. Kids too were very affected. Not being able to go to school and socialize in person, not being being able to engage in physical activity as much, and also spending lots of time on screens. And so all that contributed significantly to a downward spiral in their mental health. And one report actually cited that there was around 67 to 70% of children that had a deterioration in at least one area of mental health. So, for example, depression, anxiety, and other obsessive.
Roof.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, OCD, you were saying, like obsessive compulsive disorder. I could see that happening. Absolutely. It was just unbelievable what these kids went through. Is there any evidence that the lockdowns contributed to an increase in suicides?
Yeah, so that's a good question because suicide was, okay, I'm talking about medical assistance in suicide was legalized in 2016. And so since 2016, we see a continuing trend, upward trend in suicides, assisted suicides. But that trend increased even more in 2021. By 2023, we saw more than 15,000 Canadians choosing to die at the hands of doctors. And so that was about 5% of all Canadian deaths. And it was over 600 of those deaths that were with Canadians that did not have natural death reasonably foreseeable in the near future. And so that meant that it was Canadians with some sort of mental health issues. In terms of suicide overall, we didn't look at that very specifically, but those results were more mixed.
Oh my goodness. And of course, one of the problems during COVID was that thousands of medical checkups, diagnoses, treatments were delayed or canceled. And of course, that results in a serious ongoing backlog in Canada's healthcare system, doesn't it? So the question is, I guess, did efforts to stop the spread of COVID inadvertently cause more sickness and deaths that would have happened without the lockdowns?
Yes, that's absolutely true. During COVID, many thousands, I think it was over 15,000 MRI scans that were canceled, as well as a similar amount of cancer surgeries, non-urgent cancer surgeries that were canceled. And so that resulted in delays of diagnoses of cancers and various other illnesses, and it also resulted in cancer cases being more progressed already. And so there was a study that came out in the UK that listed all the number of excess deaths in various cancer categories. So, for example, lung cancers, prostate cancers, and so on. They all saw cancer cases above like 2,000 to 3,000 number of deaths in those cases in a year. So
that is scary. I mean, when you mention cancer surgery, I think any surgery for cancer should be an important one, should be right at the top of the list, not one that can be left for months and years. That's so scary. So Benjamin, what was the economic impact of the lockdowns? We talked about healthcare there, but economically, how many businesses went under? How many people ended up unemployed?
Yeah, that is interesting because we looked at how many businesses went under. Or insolvencies, as they call it. And ironically, during 2020, we saw a notable dip in the number of bankruptcies in businesses, but that was likely due to government subsidies for these businesses, including restaurants. There was less bankruptcies in 2020 than in the following year, or even in the preceding years. And again, that is likely because of government subsidies. But we are now seeing, as expected, those bankruptcies, the number of bankruptcies arise. And so, for example, in 2024, we had a higher number of bankruptcies and insolvencies than in the previous 5 years before COVID.
That's interesting. Do you think there's a relationship between the two? Do you think that maybe they were trying to get through those times and then they've kind of just gotten to that point where it's like, this is how it is, and we give up?
Yeah, so again, the dip in insolvencies could be largely due to government subsidies, but another thing would be businesses taking on loans during those years. And so now that those loans are maturing with higher interest rates, as we are seeing now, it all has a ripple effect. And this is something that governments, I don't think, looked at and considered enough. And you were also mentioning about, other economic harms, and one of the economic harms that we saw, of course, in 2020 was a considerable spike in the number of unemployment rates. And so what we noticed was that those people that were affected by unemployment, they were almost entirely people that were being paid like minimum wage or so on. But the laptop class, those that get higher wages, they were almost entirely unaffected. In fact, we saw an increase in employment rates in that category.
All right. Can it be proven that the increase in food prices, housing, and other essentials was also due to the lockdowns?
Yeah, so it is hard, as we point out in the report, it is hard to actually prove a causality or a causal relationship between lockdowns and many of these harms. But we do point out that a lot of these harms were, of course, very likely due to lockdowns. And so during COVID, governments took on an extraordinary amount of debt. I believe it was over $650 billion in total debt that federal and provincial governments took on over these years. And so that, of course, had a negative impact on prices, more money chasing fewer goods. And so especially housing and food prices were especially affected with prices rising in 2022, 2023, and 2024 by 15, 17, 18%. And yeah.
Wow. This is an interesting one. The report also shows that there was an increase seen in crime rates.
Yeah, we saw an increase in homicides, a notable increase in homicides, but the most pronounced increase in crime rates was actually cybercrime. So, for example, cyber fraud increased by, I can't quite remember the number, but I think it doubled, more than doubled. We saw a huge spike in online child sexual exploitation, whether it was luring, whether it was posting child pornography, and so on. And yeah, with online fraud, other types of online fraud, people are at risk of having their of identity theft, and with that comes financial loss and all sorts of other difficulties.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Also, I believe domestic crime went up. People are kind of stuck under the house together for so long. It's interesting because there were other studies done that showed a decrease in crime rates due to the lockdown, specifically one by the Fraser Institute called Comparing Recent Crime Trends Between Canada and the U.S. They sort of looked at that and saw that crime rates went down, I think mostly because people are at home. But like you said, it just depends on the type of crime.
That is very true. I did look at that as well, domestic crime. And ironically, domestic crime victims increased a little bit for male victims, but not so much for female victims. And so the results were mixed in that regard, and we decided not to include that. But there are, however, in those kinds of statistics, many things that we don't see. So for example, the statistics showed that that there was a decrease in overall alcohol consumption. But when you interviewed Canadians, they said that they consumed way more alcohol now, especially at home. And so what might explain that was Canadians were no longer able to go to pubs, for example, and and have regular drinks with their friends there. So the overall decrease in Canadians' alcohol consumption was kind of explained away by that, but that didn't mean that they were not consuming more alcohol at home. And so, like when talking about statistics, there are a lot of different things that come into play, and so there were some mixed results there.
Okay, I can see that happening. One of the biggest grievances many Canadians had, obviously, was the loss of personal freedoms, including being able to speak freely, assemble freely, travel freely, worship freely, and not only that, but the enforcement of this through fines and imprisonment and the freezing of financial assets.
Yeah, that's right, and that's exactly why we wanted to produce a report that measured the lockdown harms on Canadians. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms should only be restricted, or any rights and freedoms can only be restricted if such restrictions are legitimately justified or demonstrably justified. And during COVID, governments oftentimes acted on assumptions and believed news reports that and predictions that thousands, tens of thousands of Canadians were going to die based, of COVID, and so they went into lockdowns and did not consider, in our view, enough the lockdown harms that were going to result, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And so that's what this report is really trying to get at, is trying to reveal the true costs of these lockdown harms, to show that the lockdowns were really not demonstrably justified.
Your report is calling for governments to take responsibility for the damage done during this period and ensure that future public health policies uphold the Charter rights and freedoms of all Canadians. So what would this taking responsibility actually look like, practically speaking? Should some type of restitution be made? Should some laws be changed? Do you think we'll see any government accountability at some point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess there's a lot of things that they could do, but I think to start would be, hey, we made some mistakes. The data showed that the lockdowns did actually not contribute to more benefits than the actual harms did. And so in the future, we need to be more careful about the kinds of policies that we put in place, especially when they affect Canadians' rights and freedoms.
Benjamin, thanks so much for being with us today. I appreciate having you on.
Well, thank you very much for having me on.
Benjamin Clausen is the Research and Education Coordinator with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.